East Side High School was one of Patterson's most popular schools during the 1960s. Joe, a teacher at this school, is loved by his students because he not only teaches with love, but also through fun games. Frank interrupts his morning class to tell him that the executive board of their union is meeting without them. Joe is furious and storms into the meeting, yelling at the other teachers for never supporting him and his reforms and giving up whenever the local government asks them to be quiet. The board decides that Joe must be transferred to another school because of his behavior. East Side High is now referred to as a cauldron of violence, 20 years after it was founded. Students are not listening to their teachers, or even beating them when they intervene. They also treat illegal drugs and weapons like candy. The majority of students fail the basic skills tests, which is bad for Mayor Botman, who does not want the state to take over the school because that will cost him his election. Frank, who is now the superintendent of the school, and Mr. Rosenberg, the attorney for the school board, come to the only logical conclusion. They must bring Joe home. Botman is not happy with the idea, but approves because he has no choice. Frank and Rosenberg offer Joe the job of principal at Eastside. Joe declines, explaining that he is aware the mayor wants only to save him, and not his kids. Frank convinces Joe to reconsider by reminding him that Joe's Crazy Joe routine has not made any difference and that he should stop taking it to his grave. Joe is appointed principal at Eastside the next morning. He calls a meeting of all the teachers and declares that he is the only person who can speak in the meetings. He asks for the list of all students involved in criminal activity, and then orders the caretaker to wash the walls. The English teacher, Mr. Darnell, is demoted and made assistant to the football coach. Guards will be in the halls to stop the violence. Teachers must focus on getting their students prepared for the next test because they need 75% approval, and the last time, the score was less than 40. Joe then calls a meeting at the school, where the students on the list will be brought up to the stage. Joe bumps into someone when he comes to the house. Kanisha was happy to see him, as he had been her elementary school's principal. Joe asks everyone to be quiet, but no one pays any attention. The troublemakers then laugh at him when he tells them to sing their school song. Joe, seeing them as unrepentant, decides to remove all of the troublemakers and promises the other kids that they will no longer be bothered. The security team removes all students from the stage, and everyone calms down. Joe also tells the other kids that they may be the next ones if they do not study. Joe meets with the parents in the afternoon. Liana, the mother of an expelled child, is angry about the situation, and many other parents agree with her. Joe refuses to give up and makes a speech on how a few bad apples spoil the whole basket. He says he had to expel 300 students to save the other 2,700, and he has promised God that he will save this school. Liana is still angry even though he has gained almost all of the parents' support with his speech. Joe finds a child waiting at school the next day. Sam, who was expelled from school for not telling his parents about it, now tells Joe that he did nothing wrong. Joe is aware of this and drags him up to the rooftop with him. Sam is called a coward by Joe for failing to tell his parents that he has been expelled. He also says that consuming illegal substances will kill him. If he wants to go, then he must jump. Joe gives Sam's a chance to do better, and Sam's promises. Joe agrees, but will expel him for life if Sam does it again. Joe visits each table at lunch to listen to what students are saying and to offer advice. Joe is happy that Ray wears a suit. It's a good example for Sam and his buddies who dress badly. Joe tells the boys to stand and sing their school song when he sees that they are bothering another girl. Joe also tells everyone that they should not move while the song is playing. So, when Darnell bent over to pick some trash up, Joe sent him to his room. Joe gives them detention because they don't even know the words. He also tells everyone to be prepared to sing on demand the school song, or else there will be consequences. Joe then goes to Elliot, the teacher of music, to inform her of the new rules. Elliot agrees but will teach them the song when they are done with their training for a choir concert coming up in New York. Elliot wants to respect the kids' work. They are learning Mozart. Joe fires her for calling him out because he does not like adults who stand up to Joe. The concert is canceled so that the kids can focus on their upcoming test. The pianist, Mrs. Powers, is now in charge of music classes. After his meeting, Powers met with Darnell. Darnell is called out once again. He thinks Joe has been treated like trash. Darnell wants to remind the principal that these students are also his. Darnell is suspended as a result. Joan, the vice principal, tries to convince Joe that Darnell is not just a coaching role and that no one understands Joe's actions. Joe, however, says that this is exactly what he wants. All the students take the test and do their best, while the teachers are watching them closely. Joe does not want to be kept waiting for long, so Joan goes to the Board of Education to request the result. A cafeteria attack interrupts a special presentation that a student was doing for local media. Ray was beaten up by one of the boys who had been expelled. He also has a knife. Joe quickly captures the boy and is puzzled as to how he managed to get in. Security tells Joe that someone has let him into school from inside. Joe then decides to lock and chain all the school doors. Joe discovers Kanisha upset sometime later. Her grades aren't good because she's lost her place of residence and her mother does not want her. Joe, determined to assist Joan, takes her to Kanisha's home to meet with Kanisha's mother. She explains that she got Kanisha as a teenager and had to give up her life for work. She's now trying to clean up, but it puts her in a bad state of mind. She thought that it was better to have Kanisha go with the child services, but still wanted her and loved her. Joe says he will help her get a new job and find her a more comfortable place to live if she returns Kanisha and encourages her to stay focused on her studies. Liana decides to complain to the school council after the news about the chained-up doors is published in the newspaper. Frank tells Joe to stop acting so crazy and mentions that Liana has organized a group of people who want him removed. The fire chief also supports her. Joe thinks he alienates everyone, just as he did to his wife. So he will write an apology to Elliot and Darnell because, if Joe wishes to be respected, he must respect authority. Darnell has been reinstated, but there are still problems. Joe threatens the fire chief with a baseball bat to get him out of the school when he arrives with the press. Joan attempts to voice her concern about this attitude, but is ignored as always. Joe is disappointed to find out that the next time Joe sees Ray, it's when he comes by the school to say goodbye. Joe later finds Sam, his friend, and their bathroom prank. Joe makes the boys sing their school song. He is surprised to hear them singing it in church choir style. Joe visits Powers to thank her for teaching them the new version, and to ask that she teach it to everyone from now on. Joe receives the results and is shocked to learn that they scored only 33%. Joe calls the entire staff to the gym to tell them that their lack of efficiency is the reason for the poor test results. They must work harder. Joe is trying to get the students to come to Saturday classes and tutoring, but one teacher says it will be difficult to convince them to do so. Joe plans to visit every student and speak to the parents, inviting them to join in. If they do not know how to read yet, they can even be invited to attend. Joe is as engaged with his students in the weeks to come, as are the teachers. Liana and the fire chief go to Botman to discuss this further. Frank and Rosenberg defend Joe, but Botman ejects them from the meeting. He then agrees with Liana to prevent her from convincing the community not to vote for him. Botman would fire Joe, and Liana would gather support for the campaign. Botman then tells the chief of fire that they will arrest Joe after the test for wearing illegal chains. He doesn't know that Rosenberg was in the bathroom and heard everything. Rosenberg tells Frank about this, and together they warn Joe. Joe quickly devises a plan. When the guards notice the chief approaching, they will call the code 10 through their walkie-talkies. The teachers can then temporarily remove the chains. Joan then tries talking to Joe to find out how their reading program is going. Joe tells Joan that he has too much work to do and his vice principal should handle it. Joan, frustrated by Joe, asks for a change of job at the end. She explains how difficult it is working with him. Joan calls Joe an egomaniacal windbag that whips those who cannot fight back. She also points out that half of the staff feel the same, but haven't yet walked out because they are concerned about the children. Joan, on the other hand, is fed up with his disrespect and lack of support from teachers. She wants to leave. Joe hands Joan her papers the next morning, just before school assembly. He then gives a speech to the students about the poor reputation the school holds in the town. This inspires them to show they are not savages. Joan is credited with showing gratitude to the teachers. Powers then sing, "Lean on Me," and the children join in, eager to prove that they're not inferior. It was great to see the entire school working together. Joan stays. The students are confident on the test day. Liana is impatient and can't hold out any longer. Botman permits the chief of fire to obtain a court order. Kanisha, a student at the school, discovers that she is pregnant. Her boyfriend, however, does not believe him, even though she claims he is the only man she has ever been with. Joe promises to help, and that they will find other options, but the conversation is cut short by the guard who announces the arrival of Liana with reporters and the chief. Joe calls code 10 to remove the chains, but when the chief arrives, he has recorded the code and is prepared. Joe then gets arrested, leaving Joan as the person in charge. The school board meets that night. Frank defends Joe's job, but Liana points to the fact that Joe did not pass the test because the school got only 33% on the practice exam. All the students suddenly show up and demand that Joe be let go. Botman is worried about the consequences of firing a person with so much support and asks Joe to let them leave. Joe is not willing to leave. Botman brings out his big guns to explain that the police are preparing outside. Things could get violent if the students start rioting. Joe is willing to speak to the students, but only to ensure their safety. He doesn't do it because they are doing something wrong. Liana talks to the children when Joe comes out. She is only insulted by him and reminded about all that Joe has done for the school. Joe reminds the children to obey the law. He is touched by their call. Joan interrupts his speech with the good news that the school passed the test. Joe says to Botman, as everyone is celebrating, that Botman and the state can go to hell. Joe keeps his job, and the students finish the evening singing their school song. Joe's diplomas are personalized with words of encouragement for the seniors.